We're here to discuss some important topics in fantasy basketball: punting, building, weighting, turnovers. Joel Embiid. But Michael Bolton, he wants to listen in.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and you can no longer call me an Iron Man. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So, we're here ready to debate some fantasy topics. But before I do that, no matter how much I think that I explain verbally or in written words, it obviously to everybody, and that is how human nature works. I'm sure we're all aware of that. It doesn't always come across clearly. All right, I'm talking about the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl here because no matter what I have done in terms of putting that out there, always tends to be some sort of confusion. So I'm going to this is for the people who are currently in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. We've got about 5 spots left across 10 divisions at the moment, which I'm just feeling that out with the last couple of invites. So just be aware of those coming through. If you are in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Draft, I just want to address a couple of things that someone has said to me. There seems to be confusion and conflicting information about it. So let's hear it directly from me, the horse's mouth. It is in the rules document and it is on the leagues where you can see this. All right, so here is how the playoffs work. That is the question that I got about the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. You all play in a 12-man division. Roto, don't worry about it. This is not for you. You all play in a 12-man division. The top 8 teams in your 12-man division, the top 8 teams in your 12-man division make the playoffs. Week 1 of the playoffs starts on March the 3rd, Monday, March the 3rd. And in week 1 of the playoffs, the number 1 seed takes on the number 8 seed. The number 2 seed takes on the 7 seed. And just in case there's any confusion, number 3 takes on 6 and number 4 takes on 5. That is week 1. That's March 3rd to March 9th. Week 2 is March 10th to March 16th. In week 2, March 10th to March 16th, the winners of week 1, let's assume it's all the higher seeds, they all play each other. So 1v4, 2v3. Yep, we're all just standard 1 week playoff matchups as per usual. At the end of that week, we will have 2 winners of 1v4/2v3, or whoever got through. Those 2 teams that win, and for argument's sake, for ease of discussion, the 2 teams that win were number 1 seed and number 2 seed. Those 2 teams who win that matchup in week 2 of the playoffs on March the 16th, they will move forward into the Battle Royale. Those 2 teams that get into the Battle Royale will win prize money. Actually, everybody that makes it into the playoffs wins some sort of prize money. And you get a little bit more the further you go. Everybody who makes the playoffs gets prize money. That's not what this is about, though. So those 2 teams that win their second round playoff matchup, finishing on March the 16th, move forward into the Battle Royale. The Battle Royale is a 1-week matchup from March the 17th to, you'll be shocked to know this, my preferred playoff end date, March the 23rd. It is a large field contest with all of the other top 2 teams from every other division. Meaning that you will have from your color grouping, whether it's blue or red or not yellow, because that's one of the orange, pink, purple, right? So there's 10 divisions in each one of those. So meaning there are 20 teams that come out of blue, 20 teams that come out of red, 20 that come out of orange, 20 that come out of pink, 20 that come out of brown, and 20 that come out of purple. That's for categories, and for points, it'll be 20 coming out of yellow, 20 coming out of black, and 20 coming out of white. And that final matchup, March the 17th through to March the 23rd, those in categories, 120 teams, play a 1-week battle royale where there are no waiver moves in that 1 week. And you, as one of the teams, as one of the 120 teams, I'll refer to categories for ease of consistency, but it applies to points as well. You, as one of the 120 teams that has made the final Battle Royale week, which is March the 17th through to March the 23rd, the exact same format we have run for the last 2 years. If you are in that final Battle Royale week, your team will take on all 119 other opponents at the same time. Yes? And that will be like a regular playoff matchup in terms of it doesn't matter if you win 7-3 or 7-2, or 6-3. You get me versus John over here. I beat him. I get a 1-0. Then I face off against Ted and I get a 0-1 because he beats me. Then I go up against Jenny and I beat her and I get a 1-0. And at the end of it, I will have taken on 119 opponents and hopefully I can go 119-0 and take down the Battle Royale. In the points league, the slight difference is it's not about those head-to-head matchups. It's just who gets the most fantasy points during the week. Because honestly, that ends up being exactly the same thing as if I did it, you take on the other 59 opponents. Because if you end up with the most fantasy points, you would win the most matchups. So it's the same thing. It's just about who gets the most fantasy points in that week. So I hope that clears up any level of confusion. The playoffs begin on March the 3rd. 8 teams out of 12 make it. It is a regular playoff for 2 weeks. 1v8, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5. The winners play the next week. Regular playoff again. And the winners move into Battle Royale for a matchup that begins on March the 17th through to March the 23rd. And at the end of that, the season is over. I hope that explains everything regarding the playoff format clearly. Once everything is done with the drafts, I will do another separate video explaining even further, again, the structure of what you do during the week with a games cap, which again has not changed from last season. So anyone who was in last season, there is no difference. No difference whatsoever. But I will do a video explaining that and using the Fantrax system to set up things. It is all the same as it was last season. I hope that has cleared stuff up. I hope. Now, if you're not in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, you can skip all that. I'll put a timestamp down below so that you can skip all that and you can just come in now for the arguments about fantasy basketball. So here he is. He is back on the show. First time this season, he's back to argue with me about fantasy basketball. It is Bob Catter's former campaign manager. Welcome back to the show, Mitch Casey. How's it going, champ?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Good to be back on the show, and ready to get into some fisticuffs of fantasy basketball.
Yeah, we're here to discuss some topics, some players, some ideas around playing fantasy basketball, and just the way that we build teams and the way that we do our drafts and the way that we approach the game. And I said this to everyone who was coming on these shows. I go, look, everyone has an idea of things that I say a lot of the time, and yeah, some of it might be garbage, and you might think some of it's garbage. So let's fight about it. So let's tell me. And you've got something you want to fight with me about. So I'm here. I'm ready to go. And I put out a show a couple of weeks ago, talking about punting and pairing. And like I've been a very strong proponent of punting all through my fantasy basketball playing career / analyst career. I've always done that. But over the last few years, I've I've come more to the realization in my mind that I think sometimes we over-focus or hyper-focus on things like the perfect pairing and this guy must go here and you have to not take this player because of this punt build and then that hamstrings you. But you think that my take that pairing is not as important or not that important is wrong. So, Mitch, what's going on?
Well, yeah, I think it can be very important at the start of a draft. Not that you have to pair with a specific type of player, but it definitely, in my opinion, shapes the rest of your draft. I'm coming from the point of view where we, you and I both look at drafts fairly detailed and look at the trends of, especially like categorical scarcity and things like that. Categories you can get early and categories that once they go early and you miss out on them, you can't catch up on later. So my sort of thoughts come from the fact that if you miss out on, say, for example, if you draft a Luka Doncic, yeah, he might be average to slightly below average in free throw percentage. But that category is super difficult to get back up if you don't draft two really good free throw percentage guys in the next two rounds. You're sort of stuck in that sort of no man's land. So, for example, in that situation, then you want to maybe start to plan a few moves ahead and go, okay, well, if I'm going to have to get these guys in the next couple of rounds, why don't I just remove that headache and pair him with someone who fits that type of a strategy? The risk of promoting, I guess, that kind of level of importance is that people do go overboard and they, hyper focus. But I do think that the starting structure of a certain build in the first 2 to 3 rounds it can be really important to plan if you understand the fact that why you're doing it is due to the categorical scarcity of certain statistics, and making sure that you are focusing on the ones that are you can get them back in later rounds, rather than the ones that if you miss out on in early rounds, they're pretty much next to impossible to catch up on to the teams that have already achieved them in the first couple of rounds. So that's sort of my point in terms of it just shapes the trajectory of your team. And I think that that's very important. These guys are obviously the best players in your team, so you want to start off on the right foot. So I do think that fixating on it is important. Where people get wrong, I think, is sort of putting the blinders on and maybe only fixating on one strategy when there might be sort of 2 or 3.
So here's why you're dumb and wrong, right? I joke, but I think what you bring up is a really important part, is because it can be very easy for me to come onto a show and talk about pairing and say, I don't think it's that important, and I will spew the next 30 minutes of words, and little bits and pieces of context and nuance that I say can get ignored, right? Or missed or misinterpreted or whatever. And the big, bold statement of me saying it's not that important, or even the opposite, you saying, yeah, it is really important, that can just be the takeaway, and that's not it. And I think even when you were talking about it there, I think you illustrated, because you said about Luka Doncic, right? If you don't get a high free throw player in the next couple of rounds, you can't really bring that back. But to me, that almost illustrates my point. It's like, okay, so if you don't get that guy in the next round, but you could also just choose the path of not getting that guy. So you could pair Luka Doncic with other guys who either are high free throw players and go down that path, or you could pair him with someone who's not a good free throw player and move down that path. Meaning that, like, there's no, like, if you get Luka, you get this guy, and it's the perfect way to go about it. There are just many different ways to do it. And with so many different paths with every pick you make, we're talking 13 picks here in a draft, and you piss off the last 3 of them, right? We've got 10 guys that will form the basic core, or even 9 players, the basic core of what we do. But if you say you want to get Devin Booker or Donovan Mitchell in the second round, and then insert whatever player, Lauri Markkanen as a high free throw guy in round 3 or whatever, and do that and buffer Luka's numbers, that's totally okay. But when you brought it up perfectly when you said about the people that hyperfixate on it, and I think that when I talk about this stuff, I have a responsibility to not come out and say, well, if you're pairing and punting, this is what you need to do, because then people go, well, I've got to get this guy. If I don't get him now, like, I'm cooked. But with the Luka situation, you can go, I am certain that you, Mitch, and me, could draft Luka Doncic in the first round, and many others can do this too, and build strong teams with 5 different picks in round 2, or 10 different combinations of our round 2, round 3, round 4 picks really, really easily. Because it's about what you do with 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, and then hopefully that 6th guy becomes a round 3 player later on, and then that shapes everything you do, versus, like, if you don't get this here, well, bad luck. And I think that's part of the nuance that I want people to get out of it, but it doesn't always come across that way.
Yeah, no, I think you make a fair point, but it's to me, it's like, okay, I could do like 5 or 6 options, but when I'm putting out content, especially like, spoiler alert, I'm going to be putting out a first and second round pairing. I'm going to be talking about what I think is the best option. And, when we're putting out content, we're trying to get people to win their leagues and things like that. And you can be competitive, you can be, have a good team, and especially if you're in a league, like say the industry pickup league or something like that, where there are lots of people who know what they're doing, and maybe it is a bit more catered towards the people who are a bit sweaty and spend a lot of time on their fantasy teams. But if you're looking at these sort of pairings, I think it is with the lens of, I want to get the best pairing. There are, maybe 5 or 6 good pairings, but there might be maybe 2 or 3 that are, really like hand in glove kind of fits, that taking all those things in mind when it comes to categorical scarcity, what can I get later, what can I get later, and shaping that build of a team early on so you kind of know where your direction is going. I think that when you do know what you're doing, that kind of can separate you and sort of get you thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, instead of, okay, what can I get this round? Done. What can I get the next round? And just thinking the then and now. Having that foresight, and it's a tough balance, right? Having the foresight to be 2 or 3 rounds planned ahead, but also not closing yourself off to things that might be there you didn't predict. So it is a fine line, but I think when I'm creating content like that, I'm striving to talk to the people that maybe listen to the entirety of what I say, and maybe not just take some things out of context, which I know obviously some people do, but again, it's hard to thread that needle.
When I think you brought up something that's really important. I don't want to play Mr. Dictionary over here, but like when you say like you're going to get the best pairing, right? And this is another thing that I've noticed over the years, is that we can talk about getting the best pairing, we can talk about taking best player available, but
it's subjective, right?
What's that? Like what's the best? Because we know that things vary all the time. Literally, like year to year, there's so much variance in player production, and we can look at the top 20 from this year versus last year versus the year before, and there's going to be similarities, but someone might be 10th and someone might be 20th, or they might be 30th, or then they might go back to 15th. So that idea of like, this is the best option for me here at this spot where we're thinking about it right now. Like I've come more to this idea of like, it's hard to know what the best is. Best player available is great in theory, but there's no such thing, because these aren't just locked in values. Look, it'd be great if you were drafting, say, hey, we're doing a fantasy draft and we're doing it based on last year's stats, and that's all that counts. Then you can go, yeah, this is the best player and this is the perfect situation. There's literally nothing that can beat this lineup. That is easy to do. But with variance of players, not only from a year-to-year basis, but like the thing that somebody does November through January versus what they do then February and March, like, which is when we're talking about winning the playoffs. Like, there is no way to be able to pick that exactly in September and October. That's why I've come more to this idea of being more open about, there are different ways to do this, because we can sit there and we can, how many times have you done it, Mitch, or I don't, we'll get off this topic in a sec, and we sit there and we look and go, man, my team, man, it's projected standings number 1, man, it looks pretty good. Or weekly matchup, man, I think I'm going to smash this guy. I ended up losing 270. What happened? Like, what happened? Like, my team looked great. I went through and I picked best available. I had the best players for this week, and then something weird happened. All right, so I'm more just trying to, again, when I'm pushing this idea, look, it is important to know what you're doing and know when the categories go, and to know that in round 7, like 7 centers will go off the board in a row, and if you don't get one, you're done, right? Like, understand that is vital, and we agree on that part of it. I'm just more pushing that if you think you know what the best player is at this spot, I'll tell you you're wrong. Like, I don't know what the best player is, but if you think that you know what it is, I think you're wrong, because there's just so much, and you can see that year on year on year, that you cannot know to the spot and to the area what is the best. It's all about broad ideas and broad ranges and how we combine those things together. We're going to come back and talk about a specific player, and I had a look at your video the other day. I think it was the top 20 players, although the first round in fantasy basketball, and I took exception to something that you said on there, Mitch, and we'll get to that in one sec. But today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. You are looking to go to live events. Maybe it is the start of the NBA season, it is the baseball playoffs, NFL season. concert comedies. I don't know what it is. There's so many different things that it could be that you're going to go and watch, and Game Time has it for you, and they can save you time and money because they cut out the fluff. They find the best options. That is what Game Time Picks does. It goes through and sorts out all the tickets they have and just shows you all of the best options there. There's so many other different things that they do as well. The lowest price guarantee. Of course, that means if you find a ticket in the same spot on another site, they will credit you 110% of the difference. And they've also got Game Time ticket coverage. So your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Mitchell Casey, tell us what you're doing at the moment over on your channel. Give us a bit of mid-show promo of what people can find and then where they can see you on social and all that sort of stuff.
Well, you can find me obviously at Ball Boys Fantasy on Twitter, X, whatever the hell it's called these days, and at Ball Boys Fantasy from YouTube and podcasts. Got a video which is probably premiering right now as we speak, talking about some breakout players. I've got top 10 players that I think have a chance to step forward, as well as a few honourable mentions.
Give us a spoiler. Who's on the list? Give me one name on the list.
Who is on the list? I'll give you a name, and let's go a fun name. Dyson Daniels is on the list.
Now, okay? You're talking about him. Kingy talks about him a lot. I'm okay with him, but is there an Aussie bias creeping in here, Mitch?
This is the thing, right? There could definitely be. There definitely could be. Dyson Daniels is my type of player, and I've heard you talk about biases and being aware of our own biases. I love players that play great defense and they're a bit more high IQ, and players that coincidentally usually can't shoot. So he's the sort of the guys that I like. He happens to be Australian. I was a big fan of him going into the draft. So I do have a level of optimism when it comes to Dyson Daniels, but no, I think he has a chance to take a big step forward. He's on the list there somewhere. He's maybe not the top 2 or 3, but he will be on the breakout list. So a few sleepers and bust videos coming soon, and then of course the first and second round pairings, which we just talked about. All
right, so I saw your video, the first round players, the other day, and it brings us to talk about the big man himself, Joel Embiid, because you had him at, I think I'm going to say number 8 on that list, or number 9, whatever, in that spot, which is about the ADP that he's going at the moment. Now, I have been on record talking about Joel Embiid, Mitch, saying that I will not draft Joel Embiid in the first round. And I am not someone who buys into injury-prone narratives. I have no problem. I would draft LaMelo Ball in round 2 this season without any question. I drafted Anthony Davis and Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and all these players all the time. My problem with Embiid is, if you have, and you know this in the medical field that you work in, like, he has had multiple torn meniscus in the same knee, multiple surgeries, and there is a giant risk of reversion on that. I think of the studies that I read, it was like 36% recurrence rate from multiple surgeries of just tearing again. And then we can go down the Brandon Roy, even like Alonzo Ball type of a path, which is obviously like terrifying. We never want that to happen for Embiid. First of all, like, do you agree with that part of it? Like, in terms of from a medical perspective, that same knee, same injury, same surgery is scary. And I'm guessing that's why he's at 9 for you instead of at 3.
Well, yeah, there has to be a level of, you're taking his value down a notch, and yeah, that's exactly why he's not at number 2 or 3. So, yeah, 100%.
So my debate on this, and this is something that I talked about with Dan Besbris the other day, but from a different perspective, is that, like, okay, so if you acknowledge that risk of Embiid, who is probably a top 3 player on a per game basis. Let's say, you can even say like top 4 if you want to be. You can see, people who are watching this can see his numbers, like 35 points, 11 rebounds, almost 6 assists, 1.7 blocks, 1.2 steals, elite percentage. This is an unbelievable fantasy line. This is number 1 player stuff, right? So if you're not willing, like, if you look at that and go, that's great, but I won't take him till 9 because of the injury risk, that is still your first round pick, right? That is still your first round pick. So if he gets hurt, you are still done. If you pick him at number 8 versus if you pick him at number 1 or 2. Because to me, the difference between let's say the second round back, which let me figure it out, like pick 16 or 17 is what you would get in the second round if you picked Embiid there. And if you picked Embiid at 3, you would get pick 21. the difference between 17 and 21 in round 2, it's a bee's dick, Mitch. Like, we could throw these names into a hat, and the player that comes out, or the player that I pick at 17, the player you pick at 21, equal chance of either of those guys, I think, being better over the course of the season. So I don't think you're getting that advantage of having that earlier pick. So my point is that if you wouldn't take Embiid up in the top 4 or top 3 because of injury risk, why would you still make him your first pick in the draft? Because I know you say the other options aren't as good, but that risk, which is what steers you away from a top 4 pick, it doesn't change just because you move down there. You haven't got a better player than Embiid to buffer that. That's why I would take him at 13, because I've already taken another first round player, or 13 or 14, because I've already taken someone who's theoretically like in that first round range. So how do you what's the cutoff for you in terms of the discussion of risk versus reward? Because I don't see that extra value in that second round buffers you from losing him if you pick him in round 1.
Well, no. If he goes down, you're cooked.
Yep.
You're stuck. Like there's no way around that. But this is kind of like a Ricky Bobby mentality. If you're not first, you're last kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And you've talked about this before on your shows. The difference between the top 2 or 3 guys,
yep,
which on a per game basis Joel Embiid is, mm-hmm, and the 13th ranked player, it's not a bee's dick. It's actually
huge.
It's fairly massive, right? So you are not necessarily trying to cover up his risk with the second round player. You're trying to bridge the gap of your draft slot and the guys who drafted picks 1 through 4, in my opinion. And when you're trying to do that with someone like a Jason Tatum, someone like a Steph Curry, these types of players, like a Trey Young, you have to make concessions in doing that. You've got to put yourself in certain punt builds to even get close. You've got to draft so much better than the team at number 1 or 2 to bridge that gap. And even then, like you've said many times, everyone has injury risk. Everyone, like Trey Young could go down and turn his ankle the first week of the fantasy playoffs and he's been done. Just because Jason Tatum's been healthy for a lot of years doesn't mean he's going to continue to be healthy. So whilst I'm acknowledging that there is more risk with someone like Joel Embiid, the upside for him compared to a lot of these other guys is obviously far, far greater. So it's kind of like, and it would depend on your league, right? Like, so if I'm in a league and I'm with a bunch of people that don't play fantasy basketball like super seriously, and I back myself to outdraft these players, for the next 8 rounds, and I don't need to take that risk, then sure, pass on him and get him in the second round if you can, and if you don't get him, that's fine. But if you're in a sweaty league and these guys know what they're doing and the room for error is much less, well, getting a Joel Embiid at pick 9, 10, 11 is a way that you can make, in the grand scheme of things, a substantial improvement on the value at that position compared to what he can do. The bump from him being 9 or 10 to being a top 2 player is like getting someone in the 3rd or 4th round and them turning into a second round player. It's that level of value in the draft. And just because it's in the first round, obviously it seems risky, it seems scary, but the equation is still the same. You're obviously just potentially sacrificing a little bit more. And I understand the hesitation. Like, push comes to shove, depending on my league, I may or may not make that decision. But it really just comes down to, you've got to risk it to get the biscuit sometimes. And I think the overall potential outcomes with Embiid is worth it in some situations. Now, if I had 6 different leagues and I had pick 9 in all 6 of them, would I take Embiid in all 6? Well, probably not. I don't want to expose myself to that much risk. But say I've got him in a couple of different spots, I think I'm okay with that.
Maybe I'm just getting soft as I get older, but like I look at that and go, I understand that you're saying like if you're not first, you're last. Like, this is your chance of winning. But I think the way that I could look at that, and that's true. Like, if Embiid does stay healthy, which even if he does stay healthy, they are going to limit him. He is not playing back-to-backs. His minutes will drop this season. I feel pretty good about suggesting that's going to be the case, right? I feel like that's going to happen almost without any question whatsoever. So, like, I don't think we've got any chance of him playing 65 games this season. I don't think that's just going to happen. But I think I look at that as a little bit more of a safety thing of like, okay, if I'm not going for number 1 and winning that, then I'm in trouble. But like I could also be like understanding the way that variance works and weekly variance works and day-to-day variance works. If I keep myself strong and get a couple of hits in other rounds, I can put myself in a position where if out of nowhere Jokic gets hurt, Shea gets hurt, Luka gets hurt, Wemby is missing in fantasy playoffs, that I am there, and through smart management, waiver wire moves, I have still got a chance because I've still got my top end guy, which of course that player could get hurt as well. But it's more about, to me, that like I'm not going to sit there at the end of a draft and just say, well, I guess I'm out. Like I can't win this through unless I find a guy whose knee is busted that can somehow play through to 65 games and be there in March. I'm not going to give up on that. I'd rather put myself in a position to get there, to see what happens. Because one of the biggest complaints, Mitch, about head-to-head fantasy basketball and playoffs is that like, oh, this doesn't reflect the season. I was the number one team all season. How did this guy who was 7th come out and beat me? Well, this is random. I need a reward for finishing first in the regular season. Or my guy got hurt in the playoffs and I got knocked out, even though I was the best all season. Like, how many times you heard people bitch about that?
Oh yeah, all the time.
So and that's like, if you get through it at 5th or 6th and you've just been smart and you've just put yourself in the right spot and you've got the right guys at the right time, like the whole idea of this is like, get there and you never know. And I think if you take Embiid in that round one, and I do understand it. You know what? If I had 6 number 9 overall picks, I'd probably take him in one of them, maybe just to see what happens, because diversification. But I also just think that given the variance and the way that playoffs work in a head-to-head format, that if I can get myself there, I think I've got a chance. I back myself to be able to get to that spot, I think.
Yeah. I think it's the old adage of, you can't win your draft in the first round, but you can lose it. I think Embiid summarizes that a lot. But I just do think that it's just a question of, well, if not him, who else? And
it's a weird spot. Like it's annoying. I picked 9 in one of my drafts the other day, and I was like, what do I do here? Like, what the? I don't even know who I ended up taking, but I was like, what do I do at pick 8 or 9? Like, I don't love this. I'm not like, man, this is awesome. I love this guy falling to me, but it's weird.
Yeah, it is weird, and it's a tough position. Like I don't, like I said, I think I said on that show, I had him ranked at 9, and I still don't know, because it's all good and well for us to say, oh, this is where we've got this guy ranked, but sometimes when it comes down to, you're in the draft room and it comes to your turn, and it's like, okay, you've got Joel Embiid his knee just staring at you in the face, and you pussy out. You grab someone else because you don't want to have to take on that risk. That could very well be what happens with me and Embiid. But I think it is when I'm putting out content, I have to acknowledge that when I'm thinking just in the way I sort of think, and that sort of I'm trying to win every league that I'm in. That's sort of where he lands for me. But yeah, it's an interesting debate, which I don't think we'll know until the season gets underway.
No, we definitely won't know this until we get to March and we see exactly what does happen with Embiid, because like we know with this game and this sport that anything can happen really at any point. You got one more thing you want to have a crack at me about. We'll get to that in a sec, but today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, so fans of the NFL, or really anybody, you can get a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. In the middle of the game, you can sit there, you can be watching it, you can get a hunch, you can see something developing and go, oh, this is interesting. I'm going to take a look. And you open up the FanDuel app and the page where all the bets are, you see them there, and you've got the access to the live stats on that same page. You've got access to the live play-by-play on the same page. So you can look at what you're seeing and marry it up with the numbers and see how it all works and just place your bets right there in the app. And if you're a new customer and you're just signing up for FanDuel for the first time, if you go in and just place a $5 bet, they give you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You do not have to win. You just have to place a $5 bet. So go ahead and get across to FanDuel.com. Check out the odds for Embiid to win MVP. I'm going to guess they're pretty long. Also, don't do it because he's probably not going to play 65 games. Go to FanDuel.com right now and don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, Mitch, the last one that you wanted to talk about. Now, I was glad that somebody brought this one up because it's something that I talk about a lot. And you are talking about the fact that I talk about in a head-to-head league that when I'm evaluating players, I'm automatically going to set things to punt turnovers. And I am going to have weightings placed on categories. And you think that I am dumb. Tell me.
Well, I don't think you're dumb, but I also think that, well, maybe, but I don't think that the blanket, and this is the tough thing about being a fantasy basketball analyst, talking about content and things like that. But the blanket rule of I'm going to go into a draft, I'm going to punt turnovers, I'm going to put my steals at a 0.8 weighting, I'm going to put my blocks at a 0.9 or whatever. I think that is a too simplistic way to look at valuing fantasy basketball. And I'm sure you would agree that as soon as the draft happens, and you talk about these things like in auction drafts as well, but also in head-to-heads, like as soon as you take a player and the other, like the first round is done, like the board shifts. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses and things like that. You might be looking for different categories, different stats than the person drafting before or after you. So I think that weighting certain categories in different and putting different values assigned to them, I think that's a smart way to go about it. But I also think that automatically punting a certain category or automatically weighing a certain category less, I think is maybe not the best way to go about it. I would argue that you'd want to, and again, it kind of goes back to that pairing video and building a team, is knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are and are going to be, and trying to attack those ones that are maybe a little bit harder. So, for example, if I'm punting free throw percentage, knowing that I'm easily going to be able to get some good field goal percentage, some good rebounds, some good blocks, and potentially weighing those down because they're going to come naturally, and maybe boosting the importance of things like steals, things like assists, points, if I'm going to go after those categories, because they're not going to be as, correlated with the categories that I'm punting and the players that are naturally boosted in those types of builds. So I've always been a big, in the past, like ignore turnovers. I'm coming around a little bit more on that being, it's still always a category. I do agree that it sometimes can boost in just a general 9-cat ranking sense the value of a player, but it is still something that we can use to differentiate certain players. So I've sort of, in most situations, gone to a 50% weighting for turnovers instead of just completely ignoring the category itself. But it always depends on the player or the first 2 or 3 players that I pick at the start of the draft to what kind of a value I would then, from that point on, assign to each category.
I'll say this, Mitch. Rankings and numbers are stupid. Right?
They are. They're so dumb.
They're stupid, right? They are pointless and they mislead us all the time. But it's the easy way for our stupid brains to look at something, right? And when I'm in a draft, I'll often look through and I'll look at how it projects out, and I'll go, okay, so what categories are going off the board? What do I need? Oh, this guy's ranked 40th, but this guy actually, I need what this guy does, and he's 60th. I'll take that guy. I don't care. These numbers in the end don't really mean anything. It's just an easy way to put guys in order. And part of the reason, I'll explain 2 parts of it. The weighting part of it, and I've done a whole bunch of work on this regarding year-to-year variance and game-to-game variance, is because I wanted to, which is over the past few years, I've looked and you see guys like, well, yeah, Jaren Jackson was actually the 12th best player. And I go, yeah, okay, was he? Like, what? Yeah. And what does that mean, right? Or in the past, it was like Joe Ingles is actually ranked 60th. And I go, okay, but there are 50 guys behind him who I'd rather draft, but the reason he's there is because he averaged 1.9 steals. And that's all well and good and all, but steals, you can get 3-3-3 in 1 week, 0-0-0 the next week, and then you averaged 1.3 steals, but 1 week you won steals easy, and the next week you lost it, and that doesn't reflect anything. It doesn't actually tell me anything about what my team is doing on a regular basis. So part of the reason why I weight those categories down is from an analyst perspective. When I'm trying to give a valuation of a player, I don't want to sit here and let me ask you this question. Who do you think, like if you want to use 9 category rankings from last season, and I know, by the way, I'm phrasing this question, you're going to know the answer. Like, who do you think had a better season, CJ McCollum or Trae Young?
Well, I'm guessing CJ had a better season because Trae Young's turnovers, poor field goal percentage, he didn't block any shots.
Exactly. If you drafted in 100 leagues, would you take Trae Young over CJ McCollum, even knowing that from last season?
No question. I would take Trae Young.
Exactly.
The strengths, right?
Do you think that Desmond Bain had a better season than Anthony Edwards on a per game basis?
I'm sure he did.
Yep. Yeah, he did. He absolutely did. Do you think that on a per game basis that Brook Lopez was 3 rounds better than Alperen Şengün?
Yeah, I'm sure the 9-cat rankings would suggest that. And that's not what I'm arguing. I'm not arguing.
But this is when I say that, like I'm punting, there's part of it in draft strategy, but there's part of it in evaluation. The same as the weighting guys down, because it's all well and good to say, well, this guy was actually 70th and this guy was 80th. Okay, that doesn't mean a single thing, because that is not actually the true value of that player. That is a metric that's based on season-long averages, which are more applicable to a roto format, which is not what the majority of people play. And I tried to downweight these high variance things so that when we're evaluating these things, so you're not sitting there going, well, and like we're back to our earlier discussion about projected standings, Mitch, where you can sit there and look and go, well, look, mate, I'm going to beat everyone in steals. That's great. My team's averaging 1.6 and this team's averaging 1.4. I'm going to beat everybody. And that's 0.2 steals, man. Like, that's absolutely nothing over the course of like a week. Like, how easy that is to recover from, or if someone gets hurt and you play less game or whatever, like that stuff is so easy to recover from. So part of my idea with weighting is more about, let's provide more of an accurate valuation, because not a person that plays fantasy will never sit here and tell you that, yeah, you know what, Tobias Harris was actually 100 spots better than Paulo Banchero last season. No one will tell you that. But that's what the rankings will tell you was actually the truth. And that just never sat right to me, because it has no reflection in the reality of their production and their impact on your team and any of that stuff. Plus, the way that we play head-to-head, Mitch, it's an accumulation game. It is a game where we talk about it on our shows. Who do we stream in to get more games in this week? Yes, that is one of the things that we talk about, and people look, hey, this guy's got a 4-game week. Man, this guy's got a 5-game playoff week. This guy's got a 2-game playoff week. We want more volume in. The more volume you get in, the more turnovers you have. So over the course of the season, a turnover number might look a certain way, but you are just pushing numbers in. And that is another reason why that you having those variance categories or those negative categories is really putting this value on somebody. I think it ends up with poor results. The other part of it is, and then I know that you know this because you've talked about it, and you've seen also, I've done this for years when we do the statistical correlations between categories, and I figure out how they all rank together. And year over year, the two highest correlations are turnovers and points and turnovers and assists. And it's almost a straight line. The more turnovers you get, the more you score. The more turnovers you get, the more you assist, right? There is no other individual category that has a negative impact on another category the way that it does, and turnovers does it for two. So if you come in there and you go, I'm going to really prioritize turnovers, you're in real risk, and really narrowing what you do, real risk of dropping your points and assists down to unwinnable areas. Now, punting points is a very viable strategy, and I think that is totally a good way to go. Punting assists, also a great strategy. But you've got to be really deliberate about it, because if you go in there with a full turnover mentality, it's going to be hard to win both of those categories, because those things are tied together almost inextricably, whereas the others aren't. So when I see those two things as the highest correlation, plus the fact that we try to maximize games every week, then I'm just not going to value turnovers to that degree. Also, if I punt assists, you know what's going to happen to my turnovers, Mitch?
Yeah, your turnovers are going to be naturally good.
So I don't actually need to worry about looking for the high turnovers, guys, because if I'm not worrying about assists, my turnovers are actually going to be pretty good for the vast majority. Or if I punt points, my turnovers are actually going to be pretty good. But there can be like a doubling up effect. If you go in there and you fully weight a turnover up and you don't punt it, and then you turn a punt assist on and you think, you'll see like the most random blokes ever appearing in the top 30. And then you get into that discussion if you're not like nuanced about it and someone's following these numbers and they go, well, this actually says that insert play here, Herb Jones is a top 20 guy. I guess I got to get him in round 3, which is just like, again, you're done. Like if you do that, you're not winning, irrespective of how low his turnovers are. So I think that just leads to more confusion in trying to interpret the way rankings are. And so a lot of it, when I do these weightings and talk about it, is more for just when talking about a player, when we throw a number out where he's ranked here and he's ranked here, it's more for that evaluation versus like, yeah, I'm not drafting in a draft saying I need to get the 30th best guy and the 40th best guy. I'm looking for individual numbers to stack onto my numbers to build them up to an area. And it's more about the evaluation of players that I think those numbers come more into play.
Yeah, look, I'm glad you brought up the correlation thing, because that is definitely something that we need to obviously be aware of. The other thing, and again, to reference some things that I've heard you say on your podcast, is someone can average 3.3 turnovers per game, right? Which is bad, right?
Yep.
There's a difference between averaging 3 turnovers a game, which is bad, and averaging 4 turnovers a game, which is really bad. Mm-hmm. Like we talked about with blocks and things like that. So it's never something that like I'll focus on. I'm never turnover focused because I think that's a losing mentality. But it is obviously, if you can get someone like, and you always need to look for exceptions. You know, someone like a Tyrese Halliburton, for example, averages 11 assists, but he still only averages 2.3 turnovers. So yes, there are trends, there are obviously correlations, mm-hmm. but that doesn't apply to every single player. Yep. And that's where you can make that category be a tiebreaker. Understand if I get this particular guy bucks the trend of being a good scorer, and he averages still 2.8 turnovers, but it's not like I'm drafting Victor Wembanyama, who averaged nearly 4 turnovers a game. So it still is, in my opinion, a category end of the day. I won't normally weight it the same as the other categories, but it is still something that I believe needs to be taken into account, unless you are intentionally punting it, which I think is a fine strategy as well. But I think more and more we're moving into it being an automatic punt for every single team. Whereas I think if you just boost the weighting up a little bit, you can get the advantage. And when you're streaming, you might have a little bit of that buffer to add a bunch of players. If you've been just a little bit cautious of it throughout the draft, you've got a bit of a buffer to still potentially come away ahead in turnovers and get those volume adds in, versus if you just completely disregard it in the draft. And again, if you punted assists, you might not, but say you haven't, you've done, a different sort of punt or a different kind of build and just ignored turnovers, you might already be so far behind in that category that even if you're at a games cap or a games advantage or a disadvantage, you might still be losing that category just because you've ignored it. So in general, I think it's obviously a viable strategy, but I want to push back on the fact that it's become just the norm and the expected first category to go when you're talking about punting. I think we can be a bit more creative in terms of how we build our teams.
It's true. Look, you can do that. And again, that's why I think that looking at how you think a player is going to perform in categories and where that works on your team versus strict numbers and all that sort of stuff is important. But like, it's more to me that when we're talking, because nobody can look at a straight Nike ranking and go, like Giannis is the 40th best player here, because it has no basis in reality of how anybody views it or how anybody drafts. Or Paolo is like, Paolo probably should sit on a waiver wire in 12-team leagues, according to his ranking, which again is actually crazy. Like, it's ridiculous. It's just never going to be the case. It's actually not based in reality. And if you put Paolo up head to head with 70 players who are ranked in front of him, and he would get you wins in like 5 categories versus that guy getting you 2 or whatever it is, like easy wins. But it's these outlier bigger numbers which really impact the way that we look at that. And that's been part of my whole crusade with all this, is to make, if you're going to rely upon ranking numbers to look at players, let's at least make them make sense. Because there's no point me saying, well, Giannis is going at 3, but actually he was 41st last season. And how do you wrap your head around that? Like, as you know why, I know why. A lot of people know why, but it still seems weird to that be a default scenario where we're talking about a player that is, there was like 2 years ago, it was 130th. Yeah. You go, well, let's go back and draft him at number 5 then. And people just go, that sounds about right. That's what doesn't make sense to me. So a lot of it is about analysis and providing that information about trying to get these things to sit in a spot where, especially even with the down weighting of variance stats and volume stats, like, because if I tell you this guy is 60th and then instead of getting, this is an example I used to someone the other day. Like, if someone gets 2 steals a game, so De'Aaron Fox last season, 2 steals a game, I think he was at, right? And he loses a quarter of his production, all right, and gets to 1.5 steals, which I think is almost exactly what happened to OG Anunoby the year before. He went from 2 steals to 1.5. 1.5 is still pretty good, but it's a 25% reduction in his numbers. Yep, we can all agree on that number. Imagine if we looked at Luka Doncic averaging 33 points a game, and then we said, it's just normal that he's going to lose 25% of that production, and Luka comes in. I'm trying to figure this out off the top of my head. It's like, Luka comes in and averages 24 a game this season, right? That's just never going to happen, right? That change is never going to happen. So that level of stability in some of these categories versus that steals one, where I can come in and have a best case guess of projecting something or looking at what they did last season, but when there could be swings that are that wild, that is half a steal a game, which is in a regular fantasy week, 2 steals total, and then that influences someone's ranking spot by 40 spots or 30 spots or whatever, that leads to false confidence. It leads to weirder team building because you said, well, I know I'm getting 2 steals here, and now you're not. And then in a week, if Fox plays 3 games and leaves one early and plays 20 minutes because of foul trouble, now I've lost this category. And I go, what happened? I was supposed to win this category and I only won half of the time. So that's part of my reason. Is like, don't place an equal reliance on things that are nowhere near as reliable as the other categories. And that's why I do it.
Couldn't you just reflect that in your projections, though? Like I've always been the case. Like if someone averaged 2 steals a game last year, I'm not going to project them to average 2 steals.
No, I do. Yep.
Like I'm gonna reflect that in my projection. So I'm gonna bring him back down to 1.5 or 1.6. But in terms of then applying, like if you're doing that and then also putting a 80% weighting on the steals, you've kind of double dipped into that, kind of taking that back a little bit. So I feel like you need to do it either one or the other. Either project him to be 2 steals, but then weight it at 80%, or project him to do 1.5 steals and still weight it as equal as you am, because you've already taken that concession.
I have, yeah, you're right. Like I've got Fox at like 1.7 for this season, right, versus 2. So I have, but it's more to reduce your reliance on thinking, because even 1.7, right, like in the 22-23 season, he averaged 1.1. So like, even though I've dropped him down, like that can still go completely tits up unbelievably quickly. And 1.7 is still like, let's say like a top 10 steals number, but there is like no chance that is anywhere close to being a guarantee. Like it's not even remotely close to being anywhere near a guarantee that sort of number is going to happen. And it's more about trying to, I guess, provide a floor level of safety of like, just, it's great. Like he can do this and he can still be very good, but like don't over rely upon something, because that is one of those things that can just change like that. And then you've thought you were great at it and you're not. And the guy who picked 3 players who averaged a steal a game the year before, now they all now average 1.7, and you're losing every week to that guy. Plus he also grabbed these other categories that you sort of didn't focus on as much because you were trying to get your steals in. Mm-hmm. And this is why this game is so fun, right? Is because there are just so many different ways of doing this and approaching it. And to go full circle as we wrap up this show, like back to talking about like pairings and puntings at the start and how this guy's the best options. Like, I don't know. Like we can have best guesses, but like you've got to be nimble in the draft, on the waiver wire, during the week, because things change. And even the stuff that someone does over 2 months will be different to what they did the month before and the month before that, and it's ups and downs. And how do you, like, adjusting for all that is really tough. So it's more about me just trying to provide a better evaluation tool, a better level of providing safety, I guess, in drafts, so there's not like an over reliance on something that is not reliable. And that's why I do it. But I get your point with it, and I understand what you're saying. And if everyone is following me and saying punting turnovers and doing this, then there is advantage of you saying, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just not going to target assists. My turnovers are going to win every week, and I'm going to get these other categories. And that is absolutely right, because if you just do what other people don't do, that's great.
Yeah.
And then,
zagging.
Yep. And then if everyone starts doing that, then you go the other way. And it's all about flexibility. And there'll be leagues where I punt assists and I have my turnovers be the second best in the league, right? But that still doesn't change my idea that I'm not going to come out here and tell you that there are 40 better players than Giannis for fantasy basketball, because it's not true. But it's just about how each individual person values it, and we're always going to rely upon rankings. We're always going to reference them, but let's make them so they make more sense.
Yeah, it's a difficult game for us to provide general commentary on, and it's tough. Like it's hard to apply that nuance, and obviously people who are trying to make it simple and try to listen to podcasts and take bits out but leave other bits out. Maybe they might get some information misconstrued, but I guess that's all we can do, I guess, and try our best.
And I think that point is really key. Is that like we can sit here, Mitch, and I can do this every day of my life, right? Which I do. and I can absorb every little nuance, and I can tell you the trends of nearly every player in the NBA, and I can tell you that Henri Drell was cut by the Bulls and signed by the Blazers and cut yesterday or whatever it was, and that doesn't matter to him, but I can tell you that because I do it. But if someone's flitting in and out and want to take little pieces of information and they hear a strong takeaway, I want to make sure that the idea is that we understand that there is a lot of different paths that can happen. There's a lot of different things that can happen and can change. And we need to be understanding, I think, that there's just a lot of different approaches to all of this stuff. And you can have success with almost any of them. And writing something off as the only way, or putting something out as the only way, or saying something can never work is not true, because we have many different ways. We're talking about 156 players in most leagues. In that league, I'd say 250 players end up making it onto rosters. And there's just so many different ways. And that's why we love it, because we can talk about this stuff and it changes all the time and it's fun to try and get it right. And when you do, you feel like a genius. And if not, you feel like me, a loser, useless, who doesn't know what they're doing. And that's where we're at. Mitch, I've kept you too long here on an early Friday morning. I appreciate you coming on and debate, because look, whether we believe this, because we do, but like, it is perspective stuff. And that other perspective needs to be put forward in order for us both to put our points forward. And again, it's all about just take it all in. And I can assure you, Mitch, that people that draft, if they don't punt turnovers and follow what you're saying, they will win. And I can assure you that if people do what I say and value plays that way, they will win as well. There are many ways to do it. And that is what's great about it. Thank you again. Tell us what, you've already told us what's going on, but give us a quick reminder, YouTube channel, your Twitter account, all that stuff. Just give us another quick bang through.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on the show. I know we also obviously said that everyone can be right all the time, but on this show, obviously I was right and you were wrong.
Yes, very clearly, very clearly. I'm a magnanimous host. You were correct and you win. Congratulations to you. Unfortunately, you lose because you live in Queensland, so you know what? It balances out.
Okay, I'll wear that one. You can find me on Twitter at BallBoysFantasy, and you can catch all my fantasy basketball podcasts at Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all that jazz. Got a few ramping up. Been a little bit more patchy this season with content, a little bit more pressed for time, but I will be doing a fair few more shows coming up leading up to the start of the season. So you can find all my stuff there, and feel free to drop any questions on Twitter if you have anything you want to chat about fantasy-wise.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed this show, Mitch. I enjoyed it. I love talking about these sort of things and strategy and ideas and the way that we can approach it. Thank you again for coming on, and go check out Mitch over in his channel.
See ya.
And that was what I thought was a really interesting show with Mitch, like talking about the different ways that we approach things and poking fun at each other and going back and forth. But like in the end, as I think you could tell by this show, is that there are plenty of ways to do all of this stuff and to approach all of this stuff. And no one's 100% right and no one's 100% wrong. That's me, that's Mitch, that's anybody playing this game. There's so many ways to do it. Be nimble, be flexible, be ready to adjust, and be ready to have fun. Guys, done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.